Welcome back to Nothing Happens for a Reason. I am so grateful to be here with you for season 3. This is a space where we honor the truth of grief without the pressure to fix it or find a hidden meaning. We believe in dismantling the platitudes and sitting with the messy, unfiltered reality of loss. Whether you've been with us since the beginning or you're finding us for the first time today, I'm glad you found your way here. Let's get into today's episode. This is Nothing Happens for a Reason. Do you want to introduce yourself for our listeners?
Yes, sure. So for anyone listening or watching, I'm John. I'm from the New York City area. I'm a former elementary school teacher, a current graduate student in a clinical mental health counseling program. But importantly, I'm a griever. And I kind of love describing myself that way and using that word because it helps to put some language to an experience that is often so difficult to put language to. And, my particular grief is partner loss. I lost my partner, Katie. She passed away in early December of 2025. So not all that long ago at the time of recording this. This is about 7 months ago. And, the past 7 months have been just the hardest 7 months of my life. And I've been through some really hard things in my life. And so, yeah, I'm just really excited to talk to another griever and talk about grief because it's one of the few things at the moment that still excites me and gives me a sense of joy and meaning.
What do you think excites you and gives you meaning about the topic?
It's a great question. As much as grief is deeply personal, we also, of course, have the understanding that it's very universal. And as much as I am in so much pain from my grief, I've always been the kind of person who liked to wrestle with deep questions of life and other things. And so I just can't help but want to, in spite of my own suffering and my own sense of what my life means or doesn't mean, nevertheless, I also just want to understand, right? Like what is this experience of being human that causes me to feel this way? And how does that work for other people? What are the commonalities? What are the differences? And I recognize that even though, again, for me personally, it's this incredibly painful, hurtful experience, it's also part of what it means to be human. And so, we've done so much. We've gone to the moon and other things and all this crazy stuff with technology. Still trying to figure out what is this experience that we call grief. And obviously we have learned a lot, but yeah, I just love exploring that.
Yeah. Do you think having it be kind of this big picture philosophical thing, is that a way that you've also been coping with it to kind of keep it bigger picture?
Yes. So one of the things that both fascinates me and exasperates me, I suspect that for anyone who lives with grief, can very much understand what I mean, that grief has so many layers to it. And I feel like I'm always peeling back new layers and then coming back to other layers. And so it's, there's the layer of just sort of the loss itself. And in a sense like that, I feel like will always hurt, but there's some ability to cope with it and accept it in the sense of okay, we're all mortal beings, we all will die. But then another layer would be timing. There's this sense of injustice. If someone dies far too soon, far too young, that doesn't feel right? That part of life and part of this human experience there is randomness. And, we would call it cruel. But, my partner, Katie, she was 28 years old when she died. Katie had esophageal cancer, which is exceptionally rare in an otherwise healthy woman in her 20s. I mean,
Yeah.
Crazy that she even got this disease in the first place. She was the most kind, gentle, loving, good person you could ever meet. She loved life. She had such a zest for life, even to the very end. She just wanted to live so desperately and really believed that she would. And so it's just so unbelievably cruel and unfair that she lost her life. And also, from my selfish perspective, right, that I lost her at such a young age and at such a short time of us being together, we I only met her in June of 2024. So we had such a very short time together, even though we had such a loving, deep, intimate connection and relationship, and we had plans to get married this year, and we picked out names for future children, and it was such an incredible, unlikely, beautiful love story that like only just got off the ground before she
Hmm.
passed away. And so this was all a long way of saying that, just the
Yeah.
injustice of it
Yes.
is so hard. And I don't know how I got on this, but I know you asked me about how I cope with it. But
That's okay.
I mean, I would say in general, not just in the context of grief, I tend to try to intellectualize things as a way of coping. Yes.
Totally. And I think too, I'm curious about you've referenced a few times worst 7 months of your life, and it's been really hard. And I don't know if you used the word dark, but I'm imagining some darkness. And I think, with humanness, being able to also express like what some of that has looked like, I think it's important maybe to share a little bit about what the 7 months have looked like before you've hit 1 year, because 1 year can feel really hard.
So yeah, I definitely would love to talk about this. Like it's something that's very vulnerable to talk about, but I absolutely want to do it because from the little I've talked to other people who live with grief and who've gone through like acute grief and hearing other people's stories, like I have the strong suspicion what I have experienced and I'm experiencing right is relatively common and very human and normal to feel. And I think there can be a lot of shame with it. But I'd be very curious if you experienced this as well. And I know your mom passed away, your sister passed away. So the way I remember feeling very much, and to an extent still feel this way, which is like I'm not suicidal. I have no intention to hurt myself or end my life or anything like that. But if I found out tomorrow, hey, you're gonna die in 3 weeks, right? Like I'd kind of like just shrug my shoulders. I wouldn't feel like devastated. I'd feel like okay. But right now, in terms of how I feel like all the meaning, all the preciousness of life has been sucked out of me and into some void where life feels much more of like each day is a struggle not to get drowned by the sorrow. And that's a hard life. And again, I know
Yeah.
intellectually that may not be forever. It may be shallower over time, but for right now, it's just life is really hard. Life is just a continual daily struggle not to get drowned in sorrow.
Yeah, absolutely. I definitely relate to what you're talking about. And it's funny as you were saying all of that and talking about passive hopelessness or, yeah, if something were just to happen, I'd be okay with that. The word that I often associate with that period for me is the void. And you said it's really hard to not get like sucked away into the void. And I think in the depths of my grief with my mom and then my sister too, like there was 100% feelings of just like, I don't really care what happens to me. I went through a period where, and this actually was a little bit before my mom died, but like in the anticipatory grief, like she was going to die, which was a whole other incredibly hard experience. Whereas like more reckless, like I was just kind of like I didn't really care if something happened to me, which was in a weird balance too, because also when you lose people, when I lose people, especially quote prematurely, right, too young, there's also the other side of my existentialism that's like, I know life is so short and, I want to live every day and love the people I love and be present the most that I can in my life while also dealing with the other side of like the dark side of that of like, if something happens, that's okay because this is just too fucking painful for me.
How is it now?
It's better. I don't feel like there's a unmanageable pull into the void, I guess is my best analogy. Before it was just like wherever it wants to pull me, take me, whatever. There are waves where it's like, holy shit, this still hurts or really hard times of year or other things within myself pop up that trigger my kind of old grief or current grief. And I was just talking with someone the other day about this too, but I think like I'm not as afraid of death as I used to be. And there are days where that like scares me more because like being afraid of it is almost like a protective factor. And so that's kind of my long answer to, yeah, I don't feel as hopeless or pulled by the void at this point, if, many years in, and also like it ebbs and flows.
I can relate a lot to that fear aspect. And I'm smiling because it feels like I get lost in a paradox because my lack of fear is scary. Like it's
Hmm.
scary how I don't find death as so scary anymore.
Yeah.
It is scary. I find it a little relieving. And maybe that's just because of where I'm at in my grief. Just like anything that takes the pressure off, just to surrender to what I can't control
Yeah.
feels great.
And for someone like me who try to control most aspects of my life to experience, losses that are very much outside of my control, like again, depending on the day, sometimes it triggers my control even more of like I need to grip on to things that I can control to try to prevent unimaginable pain and trauma. And then other days I'm like, I clearly can't control fucking anything. Let's just whatever. What it is, what it is.
Yeah, I'm about 7 months-ish out from the loss, and I feel like recently I've started to see glimpses of something that also scares me in a different way. And at some point, I'm gonna have to choose to embrace life again, embrace joy again. But like, I don't want to do that yet because even though intellectually I know that it's not, emotionally it feels like a betrayal or it feels like a misalignment. Like how could I be joyful and happy and love life? And this also relates to the hugest question for me about grief. And what really genuinely worries me about my whole future now is how do you be grateful for the version of your life that you don't want? How do you be happy with the version of your life that doesn't have your person in it? Like, I don't want this timeline.
That is, I think, a big question that a lot of people in the grieving community connect with, and including myself. And I think, and this is so basic therapy perspective, but I have to remind myself on a really regular basis that like both can be true, and being able to hold two different things at one time of like I do have a lot of things in my current life I'm incredibly grateful for, and there are things that wouldn't be part of my life if I hadn't had my losses, and I would trade every single bit of it to have my people still here. Like, I think something that a lot of people don't understand because we do live in such a black and white world that people hear about gratitude and they immediately think that means you're grateful for your losses. And I'm like, fuck no, like I am not grateful for my losses. And I do have gratitude in my life. And it's just that reminder of like, yeah, both of them are true for me at one time.
That makes a lot of sense. It reassures me and confirms what my vision is, which is I feel like it's going to take time and a lot of hard work, but I can create other beautiful things in my life that won't replace or won't make the pain go away, but have these other things that also take up space that can be sources of gratitude and happiness. Yeah. Mentioned the anticipatory grief.
Mm,
I think it was with your mom, right? Because it sounded like
yeah.
your sister was more sudden. Yeah. So for me, so I had a little bit of this. It's a long, complex story, but the cliff notes are that Katie was stable for 6 months, 9 months, also the time that we were together. And then in October, she had progression
Mm,
and I started to experience anticipatory grief.
mm-hmm.
And then that escalated in November, and then early December, she passed away. Again, not too uncommon or surprising for people in the grief community, but like in the first few months, I experienced so much guilt and regret over like not being superhuman. All the ways that I did not show up perfectly, all the ways that with the benefit of hindsight, I wish I had not gotten into a little mini argument over something that didn't matter. I wish I had said this more. Like,
Yeah.
I'm curious, like, what your experience was with anticipatory grief in general, but then also specifically in terms of feeling guilt or regret in the aftermath of your mom's death.
Hmm. Yeah. That's a good question. Yeah, I'll start by saying so my passion into leaning into like the grief community was discovering what anticipatory grief was, because even as a therapist, like I had never heard the term. I remember just going to Google and searching like I'm feeling grief before my mom is dead. Like, is that normal? And like resources not really coming up. Like what would come up when I would type that in would be like suicide hotlines and like hospital websites. And it wasn't until I had a consult call with my grief therapist, who I still work with today, where she like said this word. And I just remember sobbing because to know that there was an actual name for what I was experiencing was one of the most validating things I had early in my grief. So I'm really passionate about talking about it because I think there's still a lot of people out there that think well, it's not grief if the person is still here. And I'm like, no, it absolutely is. Like watching, whether kind of rapidly or in my case with my mom, like over just short of 4 years, like watching somebody basically die in front of you, losing aspects of her emotional, mental, physical health was a pain that I wish no one to experience. Like it's so painful. Regarding like regret and guilt. So at that point, I had worked with enough people in my career that had really wrestled with like the regret of the what ifs and not being there, that when my mom got her terminal diagnosis, and I'm originally from the East Coast and I'm out in Oregon now, I actually advocated to like down code in my job, and I went back and forth to the East Coast every other week for like 8 months, because what you're talking about, like I didn't want to have the like, was I there enough? I'm incredibly grateful that I had a workplace and a community and roommates at the time that supported me doing this. And it was fucking hard. Like I was on a red eye to Newark every other week for 72 hours and I was back again. And so like on one hand, like I know how common the regret and the guilt is. I really went into it saying like, I know that this is going to be so hard no matter what I do. I want to try to lessen adding on more feelings of like, holy shit, I wasn't there enough. And for other people, my family, my sisters, it was really hard to see my mom like that. They weren't home when my mom died and I was. And in some ways, like this might sound a little bit backwards. Sometimes I have regret that I was there when she died, because I have like a seared memory in my head of her at the end and her being taken out by the morgue, right? Like things that my sisters don't have. And in my heart, like I'm glad I was there. And there are moments where I'm like, oof, that's my last memory with her. And that feels incredibly hard sometimes.
I have to say that I really appreciate that perspective. I absolutely haunting. Yeah, oh man, it's so hard. So hard.
Haunting is the right word, I think. I just got chills when you said that word. I think it's haunting. And I think too, it's another reason that through my progression and different passions within the grief community too, is like learning about how other cultures deal with death. And, it is a very American thing to like not want to be there, not want to look at it, right? Some cultures like hang out with the dead body for days, right? Like, and at first I'm like, ooh, I don't know how I feel about that. But I think that it's just interesting to learn about it too, because there are just so many things I think in our culture that just like totally screws up the grieving process, at least in my perspective.
Yes. Okay. So I recognize that I'm 7 months into grief, so I'm looking for any reason to be angry and whatever. But
Yeah.
I'm honestly, I feel so much anger that I personally and that people in general are not, for lack of a better term, quote unquote, better prepared for grief and death. This is the most painful thing of life, maybe like the most defining thing of life. And it was never talked about ever. This is maybe a terrible analogy, but if you're going on a trip somewhere, you look, where is it on the map? What's the itinerary? What kind of clothes do you need to pack? I'm like, I wish that from a young age, I had grief education where it's like,
Yes.
listen, we all die. You're going to die. I'm going to die. Like it's painful and like it's part of life and there's no way to avoid the pain, but you should know about it. And this is where we're starting. And then when I get a little bit older, then I'm a teenager, there's more discussions, but that's my perspective.
I only can speak for myself, but I don't think that anger goes away, because I still feel that just these last like 6 months, I got my end of life doula certificate, not to necessarily actively practice, but I want to know more. And there's a lot of things in that class that actually, I guess that going back to your original question, that's something like learning about the end of life process, things that I wish I had known when my mom was in the dying process. I wish there had been more conversations, and I wish we would have had a death doula part of the process. And one thing in that class that I actually wrote about that just like hit me like a ton of bricks, that I would say is regret, and not logically, right? Because I didn't have the information at the time. But, like my mom struggled with appetite for years from chemo and not doing well. She was already like very skinny. So through that process, she had lost a lot of weight and was just like bones at one point, and learning, especially the last few months where she was in her dying process, how much emphasis we really put on trying to get her to eat. And in the class, learning at that point when the body is dying, like that's not what the emphasis should be on. And I had this feeling of like I wanted to cry when I was reading about it, because we tried so hard of like anything we could do to try to get her to eat. And I'm like, wow, it's not what she needed. I feel like I could cry right now talking about it. Like, so everyone should take a death doula class, like not even to practice, just to learn about what this is, so we are better prepared. So like there's that part of it. We've been doing these will dinners to like even just talk about like the logistical parts on the end here, that people are like, you don't need to do that till you're later in life. And I'm like, that's not true. And so like there's so many things that my interests have gotten very broad in this space, but because what you're talking about, I'm passionate about it. The anger of the grief illiterate culture we live in, like at least for me, has not gone away, and I don't think it's going anywhere.
Yeah, and this actually connects to something you said earlier about like you're not grateful for the losses, you're not grateful for the loss, but you still nevertheless like grow out of it. One of the most painful things for me is that I have grown so much as a person since Katie's death. And it just pains me that she doesn't get to see this version of me, because I think she'd be so proud of how much I've grown. And of course, like you said, I would trade it all in a heartbeat for to just like go back and have her still here. But I also, I wish I had the opportunity to like have some of this growth that didn't require losing the love of my life,
Yeah.
And I feel like sometimes there's what we can do, right? But then there's also what the other person wants to do. And I didn't have the wherewithal. But even if I had, I don't know that it would have changed too much, because Katie didn't want to have those conversations, because she held on to hope. Even to the very
Mm,
end, she had hope that she would beat her disease. I struggled with it for a while at first, and I still struggle sometimes, but I realized that's what she needed, right? That's the best way I could have supported her, is just supporting her in that. But like the cost of that is brutal, because just personally, I feel like if I'm ever like dying, and I hope I have like the neurological capacity to remember this, I would want to like with all my loved ones like, have those conversations, be like, listen, I'm going to be dead in a few weeks, whatever it is. And like, you're going to have these thoughts of like, oh, I wish we didn't have this fight, or know that like everything's fine. I know you're going to wonder, yes, I know how much you love me. Know that whenever those doubts creep in, like, did I say I love you enough? Do you know I loved her, but did she know that
mm.
she meant everything to me? Like everything? I think she knew that. But when you don't have it so explicitly, especially when you're going through the trauma of loss.
In some ways, it's maybe not as like rapidly at the end of the last week, but something else in the end of life doula certification was we did legacy projects, but then also these like questionnaires that doulas will work with people in the dying process, of similar things that you're talking about, of like who are the people that you want to make sure they like know that you love them, who are the people that like, is there forgiveness, is there people that like things are unresolved with. And so there's a lot of really interesting and kind of cool things that doulas can do with people. And we don't need doulas to do them with people, but being able to, I guess in some ways, like wrap things up as best as they can in an obviously heartbreaking, unfortunate situation, whatever the case is. But it's incredibly hard, especially, right, if it's like sudden, or it sounds like in Katie's case, like very rapid at the end. And she didn't want to have those conversations. And when you said that, that like breaks my heart for everyone around her, and actually for her too, knowing that she did end up dying and her not having those conversations. I have my own projection going on around like, wow, that must have been so incredibly hard for everyone.
I go back to there's so many layers here, right? There's the layer that feels selfish on my end, but then there's also a layer of just how utterly sad for her, how badly she wanted to live. Like it's just heartbreaking. Heartbreaking. Like aside from my own happiness, which obviously hugely impactful to my own happiness, but just for her and just like you kind of alluded to a little bit, it's seeing someone lose aspects of themselves. It's just the most devastating thing. And, you know, this reminds me, so you talked about the anticipatory grief and like discovering that this was a known thing and getting that validation. So something that I would love to get your thoughts and perspective on is the subject of disenfranchised grief.
Hmm.
I feel like that's sort of a big aspect of my experience that I'm wrestling with. So Katie and I, it was like a life a shared future interrupted. We were planning a future together. We knew exactly how we were going to get married. We had a general timeline of when I would propose her. She had picked out like 5 rings, and like I was going to pick one of those, and but she didn't know which one it was going to be. I had picked out which one of the ring. I was probably going to propose to her around Christmas, but when she passed away December 5th, I feel like a de facto widower, but I don't get the recognition as one, and it's hard to communicate with people and explain, and it's challenging. Of course, people have reached out and all of this, but I feel like in a lot of ways, I don't know. I mean, grief is already lonely to begin with, but it feels especially lonely in my case. It feels very unrecognized and less recognized. It is a hard thing to put language to. Yeah, I'm curious what your perspective is on this.
You're touching on kind of a foundational thing that I'm also very passionate about talking about because it's something that societally we really struggle with, but it's imperative suffering and hearing other people's stories and people moving into comparing of like, oh, mine's so much worse or theirs is so much worse. Who am I to have feelings about it? And I think comparative suffering is one of the things that is the most toxic for connection. And so when I'm hearing you say that, on one hand, I'm like, I'm not surprised because I know the world that we live in. And it's like devastating because for people to either make you feel that way or like things that have been said, yeah, and it adds to the loneliness versus the other side of the coin of comparative suffering is common humanity, of just focusing on the fact that as humans, we suffer and that's what connects us. And it doesn't actually matter the details beneath that. And, when I was reading your submission about coming on the podcast, that's something that I was curious about. I mean, I don't think you even used the word disenfranchised grief, but I was curious, right? Like having a shorter relationship, you can correct me if I'm wrong. There's definitely the grief of the year and a half you were together. And I can imagine a lot of your grief is like the grief of the lost future that you two are planning and all the secondary losses that come from that. In a world where we don't really recognize disenfranchised grief, then we definitely don't really understand and recognize secondary losses. I can see that people would like just put you into a box and not understanding the ripple effect and the grief of the lost future, which is absolutely devastating.
Yeah, like you said earlier, two things can be true, right? I think that people fail to appreciate and recognize. At the same time, I think that it's genuinely difficult for them to even have the opportunity to understand. And the way I feel is I'm struggling to figure out how to like make my grief more visible. And it's one of the reasons I just so appreciate this kind of a space and this medium or platform. Katie, she completely changed my life. And I like to think that I changed hers too. It really just felt like we were two people that I just hadn't found our person for whatever reason and then found each other. And it was just incredible. Just this unlikely, beautiful connection. We're both cancer survivors. That's how we met. We met at a young adult cancer survivor game night event thing and just had so much in common. And then as we got to know each other, just like complimented each other. And then also like from a personal perspective, I grew up and I just came to be a person who didn't just at my core did not believe that I was lovable, did not believe I was worthy of love. And she changed that. She really fundamentally changed. She changed that and she gave me evidence that I am worthy of love. I could be loved. I was loved. And it was just, it's like the depth of, how meaningful she was to me, just like I cannot express. I mean, I tried to express to her and like we had such a depth of love and people don't necessarily see that, but it's like that's how it feels. It was that deep of a loss and it's a pain that I know I'm going to carry the rest of my life and it's overwhelming and sometimes it feels unbearable and there's no making it go away, but like I wanted to be seen and held by others. So that's where it's really hard.
I really appreciate you sharing that and the deep impact of what you said of her being able to give you such a beautiful gift of maybe starting to move the needle of that narrative that you actually are lovable. And that just, yeah, adds to the depth of the grief of losing somebody who is able to show you that for sounds like the first time ever. And are you open for an observation?
Yes.
I think sometimes it might start with us like not using qualifiers. You were talking about this beautiful relationship and a couple times you threw in there, like, even though it was only a year and a half, it was only a year and a half, right? And I think sometimes when we do that, we're trying to beat people to the punch of what they're gonna say. And I guess from my seat, at least, it's not needed. Like, it doesn't matter. You could have met Katie 2 weeks before she died, and if she made an impact on you, then your grief is worthy of being held and seen. And so I had that thought as you said that a couple times of like, I don't know if it matters to say it. I don't know if you feel like it's helpful for you. And of course, if it is, like, keep doing it. But I think those qualifiers can actually minimize our experience more.
I really appreciate that observation. Yeah, I'm gonna work on that slash reflect on that. I assume that there's a certain type of narrative that people construct. But yeah, I think you're right. I was talking to a friend the other day and I mentioned how we're going to get married. I had picked out a ring and all of this. And she was like, "You were going to get married?" And I was like, "Yeah." She said something like, "You had been together since last May." And when she said that, I just felt so hurt by that. I felt so unseen, felt so judged. I suspect my qualifiers are like a reaction or a preemptive reaction to that kind of a judgment.
100%. Yeah. Like, I get it. I get why we do qualifiers. And I think sometimes, yeah, it can be helpful for our own process or for your own honoring of your relationship with Katie, right? Like, am I doing this to try to beat someone to the punch or ease somebody else's perceived discomfort with whatever my story is? Or is it important for me in a similar way? And I think because it also connects to disenfranchised grief, I've done that with my sister because one, I have interacted with many people who have a lot of judgments about my sister dying of an overdose, and people make assumptions about what that means. And I'm like, she was one of the most intelligent people I've ever met in my whole entire life, like perfect on the English of her SAT. She went to Cornell. She had a amazing job in New York City. Like, on the outside, she was all of these things. And then when people hear how she died, which is important to talk about how she died because I think it helps break stigma. But I have in the past wanted to really explain, like, no, this is who she was, so people don't make an assumption. But also on the other side, I'm like, people are going to make their assumptions about her. I like to share about how amazing she was and opportunities that I choose, but not in a way to like try to ease somebody else's discomfort about, the thing that took her life. And so I have to, on a regular basis, kind of look into my own qualifiers, or like people think because she died of an overdose, her and I didn't have a relationship. I'm like, no, we were incredibly close. I loved my sister so deeply, and we had a really special relationship our whole entire life. And it's those things I choose to usually not opt into purely to try to ease somebody else's narrative because it's more for them than it is for me at that point.
I'm curious because this comes up for me a lot. If you are meeting people for the first time, like at some kind of event or whatever, because I find myself like people will say things, even just now, you mentioned you're in Oregon now. The Oregon coast was her favorite place on the planet and she loved travel. She's been to like all these different places in the world, the Oregon coast, and she wanted to take me there so badly. And one day I'm going to go there and I'm going to like cry like a baby. But anyway, often I get this prompt of like, "Oh my gosh, that was Katie's," blah, 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 and people are gonna be like, "Who's Katie?" My deceased partner. It's just, I don't know how to navigate. Yeah. I'm just curious.
I have gotten to a point where I just say the thing because, again, I think it's important in my own process of trying to normalize these conversations, and it makes people uncomfortable, and I catch people off guard. Like, I have a tattoo on my wrist of a moose for my sister. It's a very visible tattoo, and people ask me all the time, like, "Oh, tell me about the moose." "Oh, I got it for my sister who died." And people are always like, oh, okay. Like, it's very, they get uncomfortable, It doesn't matter to me. I will say what trips me up still to this day the most. You have siblings. I do. And then I have this awkward thing where I say, like, my sister who's still alive, she lives here. My sister who no longer is alive, like, you still live here. So it's those things that still like trip me up a little bit. And the simple answer to your question is like, I usually do opt to say the thing, and I get to gauge how people respond. Then I get to gauge, are these people that I'm going to continue to lean into with my life? Are they people who don't know how to hold my grief? And it's fine. It's kind of information gathering for me at this point of how people respond.
Yeah, I actually view this as another secondary loss, which is that people who I think otherwise I would have gotten along so well with, it's like, if they're not someone who has had loss in their life yet and is uncomfortable with grief, this wall goes up and that's sad.
No, I do think it's secondary loss. And I've worked with my therapist for years on this of like, I was in this weird balance, especially early on when my mom died, of like feeling so alone because at that point, no one in my immediate circle had lost anybody before. And I had friends show up better than others. And then some just not knowing what to do. And something also common is losing friends amongst that because they just kind of disappear because they don't know what to do. I think I've gotten better of not just like writing somebody off, but I put them in a box. Like I put them in a category of, yeah, maybe this is a friend that we can go get dinner together and have fun, but they're not the person I'm going to be vulnerable with. I have coworkers who know certain, like my sister, my mom's death day, they have it in their calendar. They're there for me. I have other friends and coworkers like would never even consider doing that. And I'm like, it's not that I don't want you in my life. I just know you are the type of person that I'll go to for this, but not for these other things over here. And you won't know me in a way that other people get to know me, which is okay. I've gotten to a point where I'm not resentful. I used to be really resentful about it. I'm not resentful. I just know now.
That makes a lot of sense. That's something that I figured out early in my grief, which was, okay, they're like friends that are willing to listen to me. I just want to like cry and talk about Katie. And I have friends who are willing to do that for me, and I'm so grateful for them. And then I had friends who were not willing, but I just wanted to like play a video game or just do something, right? So I had my distraction friends and I had my vulnerable friends. Yeah, that makes sense. I want to ask you, recognizing that you're farther out than I am in your grief, I'm really curious to know both what it looks like for you now and maybe advice you'd have for me. What do you do on your sister and your mom's birthdays or day of their death? I would love to know.
The first thing I'll say, I've been working with the same grief therapist since 2018. I found her before my mom died. When my sister unexpectedly died and I went to like an emergency session with her, I remember I was in shock. I was devastated, couldn't even get words out. And I'm like, okay, I've done this. And I remember her looking at me being like, you have not done this before. This is a different person. Like, yes, you have survived before. That's important to remind yourself, but this is going to be different. And I needed that reminder or that reality check. And she was so right. They are such different losses that it feels like the grief for both of them, like they're not even, I can't even say like they're parallel. Like they were just so different for me, which means my grieving process in the aftermath of them looked really different also. And my sisters, and this in some ways is selfish, but like so much of the early process was just like how fucking unfair it was. Like, why have I lost my mom when I was 27 and then a few years later losing my sister? This doesn't compute. This doesn't make sense. I always felt like it wasn't fair that my mom died when I was 27 either, but having two of like the most important people in my life die before I was 35, it just wasn't fair. And I spent a lot of time grieving the version of me that I thought I was supposed to be. I spent a lot of time. And sometimes when I think about this, even today, it can make me cry of just like, if you told my 25-year-old self that by 35, I'd have a dead mom and a dead sister, like I wouldn't believe you. I would be like, absolutely not. That's not, that wouldn't happen to me. That's literally impossible. And so there was a lot of that process of like rewriting my narrative. I'd gotten to a point of, not that I was ever okay with it, but like if I ever get married, my mom won't be there, but now my mom and my sister won't be there. And in some ways, that's still part of my everyday life of rewriting my narratives, I feel like every single day, which is the huge secondary loss part of this. And I know this isn't going to be the answer. I couldn't even tell you how I got there. I think that with grief, and this is such a cliche and a therapist-y thing to say, but like I just had to be with it. I knew going into it, like there's no quick fixes. I just let the grief be. And of course, I did lots of different coping things. I am a griever who goes into action. When my sister died, I started a pasta making company on top of my other two jobs. And I just like drowned in it. I would half joke with people. Like, I know this was a trauma response. People like, where do you find the time? I'm like, my trauma. Like, I know. I'm not in denial about why I'm doing it. Trust me, I did plenty of things that were avoiding my feelings. And I still allowed myself, even if it was just weekly in therapy, to like be there. In 8 years, I don't think there's been one therapy session I don't cry in. But yeah, I think something that I used to talk with my therapist about, that I couldn't tell you what was the change just other than time and intentional practices to heal. I have a whole list of grief myths, like time heals all wounds. I don't believe in that, because like what you do in the time is what heals things. the healing, the therapy, whatever it is, it's not just time. I can't just brush it under the rug. So I just want to make that really clear. But the time that has passed where I've done intentional grieving and healing is I can now talk about both my mom and my sister without crying. 2 years into my mom dying, I still couldn't do that with her. And I remember having sessions and sessions with my therapist of like, I don't think I will ever get to a point where I can share a story about my mom without it absolutely gutting me. I still am consciously aware when I talk about my mom that she has died, and there's always going to be an undercurrent of sadness about it, but it's not, I used to only be able to think about her death when I would talk about her. And same with my sister. My sister, I went through a period where like couldn't really talk about her. I went through some other trauma with the way that she died that like was vicarious trauma that I carried with me that made it incredibly hard for me to talk about her, that I feel like through, again, therapy and other healing modalities that it's not as intense anymore. So that was a very long-winded answer about just the progression of my grief at this point. And then I am somebody who likes to do things on birthdays and Mother's Day and death days. I know people that don't, and that's fine. There's not a right or wrong way. Early on, I put a lot of pressure on myself of like wanting it to be the perfect thing and have it be super meaningful and sentimental. And I've let go of some of that pressure. And Katie would have loved this. I have spent every mom's death day at the Oregon coast. The beach is very healing for me. The last trip my mom took before she died out to Oregon to see me, we spent a night at the coast, and just again, being around water has always been a very grounding force for me. And so every single one since 2018, I'm at the Oregon coast in some capacity for my mom. My sister, I have only slightly started to get into routine. For me, I like want to know what I'm going to be doing on the death days. It's giving me anxiety that I haven't had as much of a routine with hers. But this last year, I finally figured out something kind of low key that feels good to just like have something to honor her. Again, Mother's Day and birthdays might just be as small as telling somebody a story about them that day. But I have not yet gone through one of those days without like mindful awareness that they're not here and trying to do something to honor them, or at least one opportunity to say their name. So that's again my long-winded answer to your multi-part question.
No, it was great. I have several small questions, but I first want to know what was your sister's name?
Sarah.
What you said about water, Katie was exactly like that. She loved water, she loved the ocean, and her dog was her absolute best friend. Like I cry when I talk about this too. Every time I see a dog now, it's like my favorite thing because I feel connected to her.
My dog's name is Katie, by the way.
Are you kidding me? Are you
Yeah.
serious?
Yeah.
My gosh. See, and by the way, okay, also I have to say that pre Katie's death, falling in love with Katie made me a little bit more spiritual than I ever had been. Most of my life, I was like the most just like rational, none of this woo-woo shit, like no. And now, like to me, that's a sign. I totally read that as a sign, and I just choose to believe in that now. Yeah, so yeah, what you said about, if you had told your 25-year-old self that by age X, you're going to have a dead mom and a dead sister, you wouldn't have believed it. I think that resonated so deeply with me because honestly, the whole thing with my story with Kate, like I said, so we met in June of 2024 and I had cancer in 2022. And again, if you had told me in 2020, you're going to have cancer in 2022, I would have been like, what are you talking about? I just went through like the worst year of my life. And then, 2024 was a pretty dark year for me because unfortunately, like I'm cancer free and that's great, but I developed a lot of late onset like complications and a lot of health challenges because of my treatment and surgeries. And so 2024, I was really struggling and it was like, am I ever going to be able to live a normal life? And it just seemed things were really dark. And I mean, I met Katie in June and we would see each other at this recurring event every couple of months, but we didn't really talk that much. And then we became friends in December of 2024. Then if you had told me that in 2023, you're going to meet someone next year, you're going to fall in love, and then you're going to travel with her, you're going to like go on like road trips, and you're going to travel to Alaska together and like all this stuff. I'm like, what are you talking and then also then she's going to die and like then you're going to be heartbroken, and it's so unbelievable, it's surreal, it's heartbreaking. And I guess this is the human experience, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah, it is. Unfortunately.
Yeah.
Well, I'm curious, as we're kind of wrapping up, if you could give your younger self advice, like the younger self, even pre-2022, like that hard year, knowing what you know today, what would you want to tell yourself?
I think this is really a lesson that I learned in 2022 from my cancer experience, which is because I nearly died in 2022. And I remember that the thing that weighed most heavily on my heart was thinking of all the things that I didn't even try for because I was afraid of rejection or failure, or just thinking like, well, there'll be time later or whatever. And knowing that I might die without ever having truly been in love. Like, how heartbreaking is that? And I think the biggest perspective shift for me was realizing that like rejection hurts, heartbreak hurts, failure can hurt, all these things can hurt, but it's kind of like that whole cliche of like choose your hard, right? It's like that, it's like choose your hurt. The hurt of trying for something and getting rejected or it not working out is much, 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 much preferable to
Mm.
the hurt of never having gone for it in the first place. And I can tell you, as someone who since 2022 hugely shifted to where I think most of the time I do live a life now of courage and alignment with my values. I remember when I told Katie that I liked her as more than a friend. I was terrified because we were such good friends at that point, and I was afraid that if she didn't feel the same way, it would like mess up the friendship. But listen, sometimes you just have to take a risk. And I can tell you, like, since 2022, having lived this way for the most part now, I can tell you that even when it doesn't work out, even when you are rejected or even when it doesn't go the way you wanted it to, there is this amazing feeling of pride that you have in yourself for having lived your life in alignment with that value. And
Yeah.
so it's almost like you win regardless because knowing that you did your best and you went for it and you lived in alignment with what is important to you is amazing. And so even if it doesn't work out the way you want to, you still kind of win. So that's what I would impart to younger John.
I love that. I think that that was a really great answer and a really good way to like wrap up the episode. I think that it's very beautiful and yeah, ending on the note of like there's that cliche quote, but like it's better to have loved and lost than not loved at all, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Even on my worst days and my worst moments, would I trade it away? Like, absolutely not. If I were to die tomorrow, if I were to find out that like my life was going to get cut short the same way that Katie's life was cut short, the same way your sister's life was cut short, right? If that was going to happen, well, at least I've had a part of my life that I'm genuinely proud of and feel like this was a life worth living. These are the things that make life worth living, the love that we feel for other people so deeply.
That was really nicely said. Thank you so much. Thanks for coming
Thank you so
on
much.
and sharing part of your story and part of Katie's story and honoring her in that way and being able to really like lean into this. 'Cause, yeah,
My
it's
pleasure.
hard and it's important.
Yeah, no, oh, absolutely my pleasure. This has been wonderful for me. So thank you so much.
Yeah, you're welcome, John. Thank you for joining me for another episode. If this conversation helped you feel less alone, there are a few ways to stay connected into this community. To stay updated on everything we're doing, you can subscribe to our newsletter or follow us on Instagram. If you're feeling the digital fatigue and looking for support that you can actually hold in your hands, please join the waitlist for the Echo Registry. Our Pen Pal project is for anyone tired of connecting through screens and looking for the tactile connection of writing to another grieving human. And of course, you can grab the free ebook, Let Me Know If You Need Anything, and other things to stop saying right on the website. And lastly, if you haven't yet, please take a second to rate and review the show on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. It's a small act that makes a massive difference in helping other grievers find this space. Take care of yourself, and I'll be back next week with a brand new episode.